Hello, and welcome to the first episode of my new show, The DNA of Music, which features interviews and performances with musicians from a variety of traditions from around the world. My name is Pedro Bonatto. I am a photographer and a musician, and my goal as an artist is to try to find the connections between cultures and find the underlying themes that we see in our stories, our myths, and our music. In this series, I'm going to take you on a personal journey that will lead us through small villages in Ukraine all the way to vast deserts in the Near East and beyond. My first guest is Matti Palonen. He's a musician and an instrument maker, and we're going to talk about the music from Finland, the ancient and beautiful music from that country, and how he traced his roots musically through that region, and how he expanded his practice with influences from a bunch of different traditions from around the world. You can learn a lot more about this project on my website, pedrobonatto.com/DNA, as well as ways you can support it and join this conspiracy to share the beautiful music of our planet. So here is my first conversation in this series with Matti Palonen, and I hope you'll enjoy it. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and the stuff that you like, how you started with music. Like, do a little intro of what Matti is all about.
Sure. Okay. So I moved to Toronto about 10 years ago to be an environmental consultant, and quite shortly after I moved here, I joined a band called Toronton Pelimannit, and that is a Finnish folk dance band that plays a lot of, kind of traditional stuff like polskas and mazurkas and shatish, and then on up to more modern 20th century dances like tango and foxtrot. So we would always go to these Finnish festivals every summer, and so when I was in Thunder Bay one year, I came across a fellow who was selling the Kantele. I'd kind of been a bit familiar with it. This was maybe about 2012. Familiar with the instrument, but never really seen or played it. And so at that festival, then I got a chance to really kind of to sit and play with one, and then so I ordered one from him. But then he became ill, and so I decided, well, I guess the only way to get an instrument is to figure out how to build one myself. So having access at work to, CAD and math programs, I was able to figure out the physics behind all of these string tensions and everything, and what it takes to build the instrument itself. And so after a couple prototypes, well, I guess this was my latest prototype, but it still works, so I still use it.
So let's talk a little bit about that then. So this is a traditional Finnish instrument, or like
it kind of depends who you ask, of course, but but the Finnish scholars will tell you that it's sort of conservatively 2,000 years old, or perhaps 3,000 years old. It's sort of in the family of Baltic psaltery, so it would occur, from Finland and Russia down in through Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, a little bit in Ukraine as well. But I've also kind of heard that it originated in Finland, based on whatever archaeological evidence that people have pulled up. So yes, the instrument itself originally would have been 2,000 years ago 5 strings, and associated with traditional what would have been poems or runos back before there was a distinction between poetry and music. It would have just been the oral tradition passed down through generations using the techniques of song all of the things that you would expect in any traditional oral history tradition, like the rhyme schemes and crazy time signatures and stuff like that, that all aid memory in passing down traditions. So what's interesting about the 5-string kantele is that you get the field collected runo melodies are also generally a 5-note range as well. So that's why we believe that the instrument and the poetry were intertwined for thousands of years. So and then of course when you get into the, say, 1700s, you get other traditions coming up from say Poland and Sweden, where you get different dances coming in and different songs coming in, and then so at that time then the instrument started to evolve with the repertoire and with the other, to keep up with the other instruments that were coming in, like the violin and the accordion. And so eventually, the 19th century instruments are bigger like this, and maybe even bigger still. And then finally, about 100 years ago, they invented a giant 36-string sort of concert instrument that is really a different instrument even entirely. So this would be more in the family of the folk kantele.
And so you made it, like this gentleman that I mentioned, he passed away, so you couldn't get an instrument from him, and then you decided to make it from scratch, your own.
Yeah, so I just kind of did a bunch of experiments with various chunks of wood that I found on job sites or whatever, and then eventually evolving to the point where I purchased a bunch of piano wire, and now traditionally in Finland, of course, the instrument, or the older instrument, would have been made of one piece of wood, and typically birch, not because it's magical or anything, but because birch is crummy firewood, it's crummy building material, it's so therefore it it was a suitable wood to build instruments with, because it wasn't really used for much else. And so I've made quite a number of instruments since then, and all with birch soundboards, but this one is actually Spanish cedar, which is a related species, but and then of course the rest of the body is maple, because it's quite resonant and structurally sound.
And you mentioned, because that's one thing that I know about you that is very interesting. You're we even make the joke that you're sort of like the Iron Man of world music, because you make all these cool instruments. So, where did that interest come from, of being like a luthier, of making instruments, or how did that start?
Well, my father always did woodworking, and so we have they currently live on Manitoulin Island, and so when I was growing up, spending summers there, the idea of a vacation is kind of a strange thing to me, because we would go up, May 24 weekend, we'd go up and plant 1,000 trees, and in the summer we would build a sauna, build a woodshed, build all this stuff, and so there was always woodworking and carpentry in my childhood. So that, I think, is kind of where
it started. Yeah, it's interesting, because in a lot of especially I was thinking in painting or even music, earlier, it was, you had to make your own instrument, right? And and now we're just to go, we buy it, and you don't have that hands-on relationship to it. That's why I was asking. So how does that influence your work with the instrument? Because that you're working on the wood. There's even a nice little carved detail and all those things. How does that influence your relationship to the instrument?
Well, let's see. I'm not afraid to, lug it anywhere. At one point I dropped it and one of the struts fell out, and so now it's kind of warped. But, part of me says, oh, I should take it apart and fix it. And part of me says, what's the point? I should just make a new one. So it's kind of like it just kind of knowing that my intention is to make in fact, this instrument is 15 strings, and so my intention is to make an 18 string, probably about 2 years ago, but I haven't got around to it yet. And so it's just kind of, it's I guess I'm just more relaxed about the instrument itself, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Can you we're gonna get into like songs and music and everything. Can you just show us how it sounds so that we can so the audience can know sort of like how it sounds?
Yeah. So actually, it's kind of worth pointing out that the instrument is a piece of wood with some metal strings strung across it, and so there's really, between the strings and the soundboard, there's really nothing but the metal holding it on. So that's kind of, unique to the instrument, whereas a guitar will have, the neck. And so you're going to get, half of the sound waves are going to be, they'll travel through the neck and be altered in that way. Mm-hmm. Before they get to the soundboard. And a harp, for example, is the same thing, where you have the frame, neck of the harp. Mm-hmm. Again, the sound the sound waves travel through that before they get to the soundboard. So you get the certain timbre of the guitar or the harp is influenced by a large chunk of wood that the sound is going through. But it's nothing between the string and the soundboard, so you get a lot of higher frequencies that are coming through that don't end up dampening the wood somewhere. So you get this really sort of bell-like quality, and so yeah, the instrument is. And then to play the chords.
I see, and then you're changing the pitch and of the strings by basically touching on them, or how does that work?
To play the chords is kind of playing a piano inside out. So if you kind of imagine playing the piano by pressing down the keys that you don't want to be in the chord, and then sounding the remaining keys that are free.
Yeah,
that's basically what I'm doing here. Is I'm damping the notes that are outside of the chord, and then strumming the notes that are inside the chord. And then to play a melody then alongside that, then if the melody note is in the chord, then you strum it, and if it's not in the chord, then you pluck it. So then you get some pretty quick phrases by the combination of strumming and plucking. So.
Right, and this would be like let's say, somewhat newer way of playing this, right? Like over the last a few hundred years, or how old do you think this technique is?
No, I think that it would have been fairly, produced fairly quite a while ago. Mm-hmm. Especially because you have a 5-string, and it would just be kind of conducive to doing that. There's only so many things that you can do with a 5-string instrument,
right? So
they would have figured this out.
They would be pretty quickly playing around, right? Yeah, it's like you just need to get an instrument for a week, and you start playing, right?
And then a 5-string. I mean, there's only so many different spots that you can move your hand. So.
Yeah. Oh. Mm-hmm. And that, because you were mentioning about this like poetry, right? So, and it's something that like you've been like studying and researching and like fascinated by. How did that start? Like, do you remember like when it started? Like the specific interest in this in like the Finnish traditions?
I guess I mean, going back to my time with Toronto Bellimanit, like I guess the gateway into all of this is this publication called the Kalevala, which was published in the early 1800s as part of one guy's doctoral thesis, I suppose, master's or doctoral thesis at the university in Turku, Finland. So he was one of the, not the, but one of the first people to go out into the, rural areas or whatever, and collect songs and poems from anyone that would talk to him. And so yeah, he published. He kind of curated a lot of this stuff to create a volume called the Kalevala, when basically Finland gained or switched hands from being Swedish controlled to being Russian controlled. And so the Russians had this idea that they would promote Finnish culture with the idea of removing Scandinavian culture. And so the Finnish university types said, okay, well, let's do that. And then in doing so, they created this cultural idea that the Finnish culture, which they borrowed a lot from neighboring Karelia, was valued, and so therefore worth fighting for, and therefore worth throwing the Russians out. So as part of that project, they the Kalevala was intended to be an epic, a huge epic volume that would rival, Homer or anything like that. So, in a sense, some of the culture, like some of the poetry, was kind of modernized for that purpose, just to kind of create like an epic story. But a lot of the material in the Kalevala is, from the original source material. So, so that's the kind of gateway into then saying, okay, well, wow, guess what? There's like, volumes, libraries in Finland full of this traditional material that's been collected.
And how does it work? Is it like folk songs that people have been playing around for like who knows how long, and then basically I assume like a research ethnomusicologist goes there and probably listens and records what they're doing, and then they write it down, or how does that work?
Yeah, and so what was happening in Finland, this was like quite early days in the whole ethnomusicological collection idea. This is like early 1800s. So, I mean, people would just kind of go around and really, go. In fact, Elias Lundrud, who is the author of the Kalevala, or the compiler of the Kalevala, he has his journal is actually more interesting than the Kalevala itself, because it talks about how he goes from farm to farm and says, okay, there's this guy that knows something here, so he travels over there, and then like and I mean, again, this was this was before the ideas of say, cultural appropriation were even discussed. This was done again with kind of nationalistic intent. So you have to view it through that lens for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's and the people that were like creating like this music, they were basically like agricultural societies. They were like farmers. They were like pastoral. Like, what's the background of the people there?
Yeah, so a lot of the there's poems that are considered to have survived quite a long time that talk about hunting, and and they also mention things like bronze tools that they're using. So it's suspected that thought that these would. I mean, why would anyone talk about bronze tools if they weren't using them literally? So yeah, there's the hunter gatherer societies that would have had this, and then a lot of shepherds would have used this stuff, and then pastoral or agricultural.
Cool.
A lot of there's a lot of subject matter, like for example, when you let your cattle out into the woods in the spring, then you would kind of cast a spell on the bears to kind of put them to sleep so that they won't bother your cattle for the summer, that sort of thing.
So there is a little bit of a, let's say, practical use of the music in day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I think that actually it was very practical in terms of this wasn't this was an oral culture. There was no written language, so things like brewing of beer or whatever, harvesting of some grain would have been preserved in song, just because just the same as we would Google it today,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, it's one of those things that we think like today culture is changing like so much so fast, but when you see those cultures that sometimes are even they didn't have like a written tradition, some things they last for like thousands of years, like unchanged, right? It's I was even reading about this. They found, I have to fact check exactly where, but they found this like a specific kind of like horn, and there was like a specific kind of tradition that has been doing rituals with, it's like a bull's horn, for like 5,000 years, the same kind of like tradition being kept. So it's, whenever you see cultures that were not were basically left alone for a while, like you can see how ancient certain influences are, right? Like even I think like the Coptic languages, like it's related to ancient Egypt, and it's how we can today like figure out how certain sounds in ancient Egyptian are. So I assume like in the Finnic languages, it's probably the same, especially this idea of like the like bronze tools, right? Why would you be like this ancient echoes of different like stuff that is like very, 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 very ancient. When you were talking about like the original instrument having like 5 strings,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm trying to have the show be both for people that are like into world music, but also as sort of like as a portal for people to see that there are more than 5 instruments in the world, then there are like all this different ways of interacting with music and culture. So can you tell a little bit of like how would like the sound system be? Would it be like 5 notes, like A, B, C, D, or like how would that work?
Yeah, it's basically the first 5 notes of a scale. Now, there's no agreement as to whether it was mostly major or mostly minor or mostly neutral, but I mean, I think the joke is that minor is the Finnish major, so most of the stuff would be in the first 5 notes of minor. But what's really interesting about having 5 notes is that there's a lot of harmonic stuff that doesn't happen, like our sort of jazzy 2-5-1 turnarounds. That doesn't exist with only 5 notes. So therefore, the harmony that does happen is this kind of. It sounds pretty atmospheric to us. It's just sort of like the kind of more sus2 and sus4 kind of sound. So you get like. And so, in fact, the composer Jean Sibelius is, probably one of the only people from Finland that people have heard of, and musicians especially. He was very influenced by this, different harmonic regime, and so if you listen to Jean Sibelius with that understanding in mind, then it makes a lot more sense.
So we're gonna come back to Finland, but I know that you are very much interested in a lot of instruments, right? And I know you play bass, you play timbali, and you play a lot of different things. So can you talk a little bit about your interest in instruments from other cultures and how you were working them into your music practice?
Yeah, I guess so. For the longest time, I was like, I would only play Finnish music, and I felt like, oh, do I have any business playing Swedish music, for example? And then the dance form called the polska took over, and so I was like, oh, I guess I play Swedish music now. And then from there, then you'll find that your interest in music kind of broadens regionally. So, and when I became a full-time musician, then I ended up meeting a lot of people from, say, the Lemon Bucket Orchestra, for example, and really getting into Ukrainian music from there, and then and of course Estonian music, and I met a woman from Latvia, so I got into that music, and then a few years ago at folk camp, a woman from Lithuania, so I got into that music. So you're
widen the map.
Yeah, like you kind of it becomes familiar to you, I guess, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, of course, then along or what comes along with that is interest in the instruments that go along with that music. So a few years ago, someone lent me a timbale that I found kind of fairly easy to get into, just because I have a lot of, it's any instrument where it's one note per string.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, that's how my brain works now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into that, and then from there, someone else lent me a bandura, and so I guess I was talking before about wanting to build an 18-string instrument, Kantele, but the bandura actually, I guess one of the reasons that I haven't done that is because the bandura has satisfied that need to have a giant one string per note diatonic instrument that does. And so the bandura is interesting because you get a wider range, you get the basses and the high trebles, and you can do a lot of different techniques. But one thing you can't really do as much is play these strummed chords. So it's kind of like, this is the instrument that I kind of play, accompanying myself with strummed chords at the same time as melody, and the bandura is where I'll go to if I just want to play a melody with,
Yeah. So in that case would be like your interest in all these instruments came from this widened perspective of what kinds of what kind of music that you were like being exposed to. And one of the cool things that happens like here in Toronto specifically is that you have people from all over the world, and you have very good musicians that bring these cultures, and people usually share very freely things that are from whatever village in the corner of somewhere. Oh, here, there you go. That's how it's written. That's how it's sung. And so there is both innovation in the way people are doing things, but I find that most people are very interested in seeing, okay, but how did the people that were doing this for hundreds of years, how did they actually like use that kind of music? And then you try to incorporate to like today's world in a North American city, which is I find fascinating and endlessly fascinating, and which is sort of how I started this project. So for you, like, when you started going to all these other traditions, and how do you find them like different than I know it's sort of like a broad question, but we always go back to the stuff that is sort of like near to our hearts in the beginning, and then we sort of like compare to that first girlfriend in a way. So how do you compare like the music as you went through this journey? How were you coming back to like music from Finland? Like it's like, oh, they do it this way, or we do it that way.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about studying Finnish music is that the last person to learn this tradition, just simply by being exposed to it as a child, rather than coming at it as like, oh, this is this thing called traditional Finnish music, died maybe 3 years ago or so like that. And so it's kind of considered, that aspect of it is sort of a dead tradition. And not to mention that like all of the wars and the civil war of Finland, a lot of the music really stopped after that. So basically, and also the way it was collected with, it wasn't really collected in the sense of like, oh, this is the exact like the exact subtlety of the tuning that they used, and this is the exact fingering, and this is the exact whatever that was used. Rather, this was like, even in the 1800s, preserved, like being field collected as if it was a dead tradition, and so it was sort of like to be sealed up in a museum, rather than to be shared and learned and preserved, preserved as a living tradition. So no matter who I've spoken to, I've been to Finland twice, and basically they'll say, well, we don't know how this stuff was performed. We don't know, like, sort of when or why, for example. And if if you cross-reference any collector's notes, a song would have been sung, for this reason by this river for this time in this village, but then completely different in a few villages over. So there really isn't a sense of like, oh, this is like the exact,
like how it was done.
This is the way that it was done. So there's a lot more of a sense, especially at the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, like that you have this source material, and you really kind of dig into it and make it your own, rather than like thinking like, oh, I'm going to play this like as if I'm behind a glass case saying this is how it was done when it was field recorded in like 1905, but whatever. So there is a lot more freedom in that sense. Secondly, the one thing we do know about the tradition is that it was very much improvised, because if you have like a field collector will say, okay, well, here's the basic melody that they kind of started with, and then they sang the whole evening, and it was very much improvised throughout, because if you have like long story being told, then you're not going to use the same melody for a half an hour. You're going to improvise it just to kind of keep yourself remembering things and keep yourself keep the storytelling compelling, I guess. So because it's very improvised, then that just becomes part of your approach to any sort of traditional music anyway. And then another factor, the third factor that is important to how I approach traditional music, is this concept of heterophony, where
heterophony.
Yeah. So when you sing a lot of, say, Ukrainian music, you have polyphony, where you have these specific, not specific, but like parts to a song that kind of like, there isn't really a main melody to the song, but there's like three parts, say, that go together to make the song kind of what it is. And that is not, or at least in Toronto, that's not heavily improvised. And so in the like, say, Karelian tradition, you would have got a sort of a basic melody that really was like, everyone was just kind of improvising on that melody all at once, all the time, the whole song. So you get interesting harmonies that kind of come out. There is a little bit of a, there are some basic traditional guidelines to how to do that, but for the most part, interesting harmonies are going to come out just as a product of one person happens to be improvising in this melody arc, and then the other person is improvising some other melody arc, and so the way they happen to go together in that moment is interesting, but it's not going to be the same the next phrase. So I kind of generally take that aesthetic of, like, to me, folk music is very, like, or my feeling of folk music is very improvised and very, like, very free. And what as long as you kind of dig into the tradition and understand what the idea is, then you can take sort of the musical grammar and improvise along with that. So I guess the difference then in even having that approach is that there's a lot of melodies that kind of get passed aside by other musicians, because it's just like, oh, well, there's just this one little melody and this whole, like, page worth of text. Why would I sing this? This is boring. I'm not going to sing this whole melody. But and then I'll look at it and say, no, this is probably this heterophony idea, where, like, as soon as you kind of approach it with that attitude, then the song, like, comes alive.
Yeah, and that's cool. And today, what kind of are you going into different traditions besides the ones that you mentioned? I know that you were very much into, like, Ukrainian music and Polish, and you mentioned Lithuanian and a few others from that region. Is there other things you're working on? I know you do. I haven't seen you playing that, but I know that you do some Celtic music too. Like
Celtic music, yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, when I say flute, what I really mean is an arsenal of tin whistles. It's kind of a different, kind of almost feels like almost a different part of my life, really, that I'll play with two bands. One is Old Man Flanagan's Ghost, and then lately I've been getting a lot of work with this band called the Flailing Shillelaghs, and they're based out of more of the new Aurora, Newmarket area. And so, yeah, I play bass and tin whistle with those groups. And but it's more, pub type music that, I mean, I don't know, I guess Irish music almost doesn't feel in the same sense like world music, because again, because you grow up with it, right?
Yeah,
it's just always there in Canada. There's an Irish bar on every corner, and you sort of like a tune like Black Velvet Band you've heard since you were a kid, I guess.
Yeah. And the funny thing about Irish music specifically that I find fascinating is that even like, as you know, like I was born in Brazil, and I always find it that it's sort of like the gateway drug into world music comes from the music of Ireland, because even in Brazil there's so many people doing like they're so interested in specifically like Irish music and that specific like vibe, and I'm not really sure like why, but I remember listening to like 1997 like Lorena McKennitt, like in the like one of those like new age stores that were starting to play, but nothing to do with Lorena McKennitt new age, but it just happened to be the case. And that was like for me the first time I heard the oud was actually in a song from her, and that was when she started with the like our Irish Celtic traditions, and then she started getting into like more world music things, and that to me was literally the time. It's like, oh, like there's all these other instruments and music and the time signatures that that we were not used in the popular thing. But it's cool that you were playing that. I haven't seen you playing that well yet, but
and I mean, of course, the same. You can, if you want, you really dig into a lot of the old Gaelic tunes and stuff. There's some really beautiful music to be done, and I know some people that are doing that. But I don't know. I just haven't really been as pulled to. I guess I don't really identify as much with the with Gaelic. Although. you do find stuff just kind of seeps into your own work, because anything you're exposed to is going to
for sure
come reflect back out. So yeah, I mean,
that's the next topic. So the like talking about all these influences and coming back to the music of Finland, that's the other thing that I wanted to ask you about. One of the things we've been doing in the city for a long time, I guess around the world, is this idea of fusing elements of different kinds of traditions together and actually creating new music. And sometimes, at least the way that I see it, is sort of like we not only create new music, but we rediscover certain things that probably people were doing anyway, right? It's like there is no, as you're saying, like behind the glass, like, oh, this is what we do and we don't miss. People are traveling around and bringing their instruments, and there is a common humanity to all of music, like around the world. So, what's your approach for like fusion of music, which is basically all music is fusion if you go back enough? But like, what's your approach to that, like of mixing elements of different traditions, or how does that work?
I just find that every player is like, anything that they've been influenced by or exposed to is going to somehow come back out in their playing. So here in Toronto, everyone, like, I mean, there was at least, maybe not so much anymore, but there was a huge jazz scene in Toronto before all of the venues closed. So, I mean, yeah, anyone is going to probably play folk music with a little bit of a jazz aesthetic to it, for example. And as I was saying, like, like when you're singing different melismas from Irish music, from Karelian music, from Balkan music, are just gonna eventually make their way into the way you sing anything, I really think. And then, every aspect of music, different rhythms are going to throw themselves into different songs, and different instruments are going to like say, hey, well, what happens if you play this type of music on this instrument? Well, that's works or it doesn't. So fusion, yeah, I mean, I think that, well, I mean, I always have this interesting way of looking at it where, if you look at the archives of Finnish music, like one of the tunes you'll find is Soldier's Joy, right? That's like an old, I don't know, English or whatever fill tune. So like that had to get there somewhere, and then some collector said, "Oh yes, this is very important Finnish traditional music." No. So I mean, it's kind of, yeah, as you say, fusion has always existed.
Yeah, that's so that's so interesting. I didn't know about that one. It's funny, and I want to ask you to one of the things, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Like sometimes we don't have time to when we're performing. We have like an hour show, and you want to actually fill it with music. Sometimes we talk a little bit about the music that we are talking, but we don't like talk about the instrument or like all the tradition and all the things that are involved in that specific culture. So for you, like it can be something that is either like something that has been on your mind lately, or it can be something that has been recurring, or one of the first tunes you learned. But is there anything in the, like a song, it could be on the Finnish tradition or Karelian tradition, that like really speaks to you, that you can show us sort of like how it sounds from a traditional point of view? Like...
Sure, actually, yeah, I was talking about the 5-stringed Kantele, and the instrument was mostly, noted in eastern Finland and Karelia, but into the early 20th century. I mean, it's quite likely that the instrument was found all over Finland historically, but it was more just field collected in this one area, and then began to be more field collected in the western part of Finland, only really in the 20th century. So there is one guy. I can't remember his name, but he was from Havasi, and so he played basically the music of Western Finland, which would have been like polskas that came from Sweden, for example. But he played it on the 5-string Kantele, and so this is another example of the fusion that just kind of happens naturally. So yeah, I could play you one of his polskas I mean, anyone that is familiar with the Polska tradition is going to think of it more as a nyckelharpa or a fiddle tradition, but he kind of made it a Kantele tradition, or started playing those tunes on the Kantele, and so here's one of those. Actually, you know what? I'm going to play it. It's major. I'm glad. Okay, I'm going to play it up here.
Cool. Oh, all right. And then so this one actually interesting more. So you can switch from like major to minor in that with those little levers, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, these are so with my instrument I have like harp levers that would have been made for harp, but it's basically just kind of adding a fret 1 to each string. Traditionally this would have been done, if at all, with by just kind of inserting a wood block underneath the string just to change the pitch.
Yeah, and that's actually something I forgot to ask you. Like right now, you said you're using piano strings with this this instrument.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And what it would, I assume, like with all traditional instruments, would be like gut strings or something like that, or what would they be using? Do you know?
So the literature says that they might have originally used horsehair, which is pretty interesting. And then probably switched the gut, and then but then copper and bronze string would have been also used. And there's a researcher, Arja Kostonen, is doing some really interesting work with copper and bronze strings.
Cool.
And and then so I mean, steel. I mean,
it's
steel strings would have come around when steel
at some point, right? Yeah, it's interesting about the horsehair because I think the rababa, that is that Bedouin instrument like a fiddle, they are using like horse.
And we haven't even really talked about the yohiko, which is the same idea where it's horse.
Right. Yeah, I think. Can we get that one so we can show?
We can get this one so we can show it. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, so let's do it. So we'll be right back. Cool. Okay, so we are back with a new member of the family. Can you talk a little bit about this instrument?
Yeah, so this is yohiko, or often called yohi kantele. I don't know exactly why the two instruments are deemed to be in the same kantele family. But yeah, so the yohi refers to the horsehair strings. These are actually fishing line, but don't tell anybody. This is probably a medieval or so instrument. There's one fellow from Finland that really revived this instrument, Rauno Nieminen. He made this instrument as well. What was I going to say about it?
So it's also like a Finnish instrument, and I assume like originally they would use like horsehair on the three strings.
Yeah, and so interestingly, horsehair against horsehair. So it's if you listen to some of the old field recordings, they're like quite obnoxious in their hissingness. The fishing line stands up much better.
Yeah, but it's interesting that because like my interest like started with the like Arabic world, and one of the things that they have is it's the rababa that I mentioned, and it's basically sometimes it's one or two strings. You have one in C, one in D, and then they just like play, and it's horsehair against horsehair, right? So it's interesting to see that they do. But the different way of playing this is that you are not like actually pressing the strings against the fingerboard, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you play this, because it's very different than
So in fact, traditionally, I don't really play like this as much, but traditionally you would have used the back, the really bony part of your finger. So the middle string, this instrument is in the key of D, so the middle string is a low A, and then the far string is the tonic D, so that makes it nice. And then the string that you fret, that you
play with,
is actually an E, so you've got D, E, and then traditionally you would have used this part of the bony part of your finger to play the scale. And interestingly, of course, the same idea where you'll have generally 5-note melodies. Now, as a more modern player, I would stick my finger in between these two strings so that I can play with the more fleshy part of my finger, the quote-unquote melody string, and then with the back of my finger, you play on the drone string to get notes, lower notes. And so you generally would play two strings at once, and traditionally play, like, always have your bow against the string. So I'll just play the tune for an example.
Perfect. It's cool. Yeah, it's we need to get this guy at some gig or something to play. It's very
I
it's very cool.
really enjoy playing. In fact, I've had I guess this is probably a whole nother topic, but
Go ahead.
I played a show at Drome Taberna a couple of weeks ago with a woman from Finland, Amanda Karona, and I played this for a couple of tunes, but being still, very cold, this cold spring that we've been having, the drone string fell out of tune, and so we played 2 songs, and by the end of the second song, I finally had it more or less in tune.
I was not there for that show, but that sounds like a regular fiddle string.
Well, and that's Amanda was just kind of like totally, it fell off her back because she was like, "Yep, that's the ohiko for you."
Yeah. Yeah, that's shout out to Amanda, shout out to Drome Taverna, very cool world music venue here in Toronto. If you are coming to Toronto and you want to watch world music stuff, you're not paying us for that, but it's really cool venue. You guys should check it out. Cool. Yeah, thank you for showing this one. It's always in my mind to see what can be done with this. It's a very, very cool instrument.
I mean, you can play actually up to the octave with this big handhold that you've got.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot more can be done with it.
And you can probably play some like quarter notes and whatever thing you can, or at least do. Can you do vibrato on this thing?
Yeah, and actually, I noticed that most people would do like that, or I kind of like. I don't know. I mean,
your way.
My way is to just kind of stretch the string.
Oh, that's cool. All right,
but I don't know if that sounds like kind of dynamic.
No, that's cool. All right, so we're gonna finish off with again. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. We've been hiding our beers around, so we look very, very professional. But again, really thank you. I really like the way you how you play. I like your approach to music. It's some of the best ways of trying to be curious, incorporate new things, and be open to everything. Yeah. So
I like to straddle that line between respecting the tradition and also owning a living tradition.
Right. Yeah, that's actually the point. I think the whole thing, you always want to see how people have been doing things for like hundreds, thousands of years, but at the same time, I can't remember. I wish I could give attribution to the person that told me this, that they said that the only thing pure is the mixture. And I can't remember who told me that. Whenever I remember, I will give proper credit. Yeah. But I wish I could have said it was my idea, but it wasn't. But
yeah, it was mine.
Yeah, even when I see I'm sure some person somewhere traveled with the idea of let's use horsehair and make a string instrument, and that became a part of a bunch of instruments and bunch of traditions, which we'll be exploring in this show. But I'm really, really thankful to you two. We started this. There was light outside, and now there isn't, and so we're it's basically a conversation.
You can't edit it. It's just
basically what you see is what you get. And for the audience that is watching us, I'm sorry I've been a bad host so far because it's my first time doing a live video interview. I'm used to audio interviews, which you can cut and take things out, but all of this will be somewhat unedited, just but anyway. And if people want to take a look at your work, where should they go?
Well, my I'm searchable on YouTube. I try to recently, in the past couple of years, I've been trying to post to YouTube once a month at least.
Mm-hmm. We'll put links on the description of this show, and your website is.
It's pollenandmusic.com, but I sure haven't updated that in
okay, so there you go. So you have about a week to do it. And one thing we should talk about, we're going to finish off with you showing one of your compositions, and which sort of like bring a lot of these things that we were talking about together. But one thing we should talk about, which I think would be interesting for people to know, is that how one thing that you've done, like you created this instrument, right? And I will put probably, as we're speaking right now, I'll probably put just some video footage of something we did a couple of weeks ago, I guess, that of a different project that involves strings and involves wood, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think you took to, it's another part of Finnish traditions that you took to the sort of like, I would say to the ultimate extreme of what can be done with that. As you were saying, like it's one thing when you have the wood on the guitar and how it will sound with the soundboard and all the different shapes and all those things. And then when you have an instrument like this, that it's basically the sound, the relationship, it's like a one-to-one between the strings and the wood. And then as part of Finnish traditions, and something that you've done that I thought was so interesting was this idea of getting the strings literally attached to not a piece of wood, but a living tree, and that you're creating music in that context. Can you talk a little bit about that project? I'll put a video so that people can see what it is, but I think it would be interesting for people to see where that comes from and what your relationship to that is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's really a Finnish tradition to say. But yeah, when I was first designing the Kanteles that I ended up building, I don't even really know where the idea came from, but I was living actually in over the Don Valley, mm-hmm. and so I would always go down into the Don Valley, just on walks or whatever, and then so I got this idea to string up a hollow tree, as if it were a kantele. I've since started calling it tree harp, but yeah. So this project, basically just the idea of getting into nature and just kind of bringing the music there, where I mean, ultimately I would love to have a project where I am able to make a bunch of different instruments in some location, which I haven't found one, maybe promising one so far, that where you have a bunch of actually, so you'd have dead trees, because the dead trees would resonate better and be hollow. Just kind of string up, using hand tools, and so it'd basically be similar to just kind of taking a hand drill and just kind of installing a bunch of these pegs and stringing them up according to the shape of the tree and according to the tree's physical limitations, really. Yeah. There's two ways you can do it. You can string a tree, like if you have a hollow tree, you can string across the hollow void and have a resonating instrument like that, or you can string probably down the trunk of a dead tree. It doesn't have to be quite as hollow, and then you can then take a bow and kind of wrap your hand around the tree and play it like this.
Oh, interesting.
So I've done a little bit of experimentation with that as well. So it'd be really amazing to just have some location that can support a bunch of different instruments that are close enough together where you could actually play a show.
Where the forest sings, in a way.
Yeah, literally, yeah. And it's really interesting. So yeah, I did this at folk camp shortly after kind of my experiments in the Don Valley, which still existing. I should probably
check it out.
Make sure that nobody's been injured. So I did that at folk camp, and then so I can't even remember or couldn't tell you who it was, but somebody took video of this, and then more recently, like, this video has gone viral online, to the tune of like 2 million views, which is kind of
quite something
astounding to me, I guess. Yeah. So that's it's kind of an interesting, like, really. My interest is, especially with, like, monofilament, as in not wound strings, I want to push their limits. I want to, I have the calculations, but there's this vague area as to what is the shortest string that you can use to have a clear tone. So when I designed this instrument, this string is pretty much at the lower limit of how long a string needs to be before it starts sounding kind of muddy, because basically the wave equation only applies when the amplitude of the vibration is negligible compared to the length of the string.
Okay.
And so, obviously if you detune a guitar and you get that twang, that's because the wave equation has failed. The amplitude is pulling all of the like, basically adding a new factor into the calculation, and so it's not giving you, like, there isn't the direct relationship anymore between, like, length and tension equals pitch kind of thing. But I mean, obviously wound strings were invented pretty quickly when people started making modern instruments, but so there hasn't been a lot of work done in what happens when you take a monofilament string to its, like, extreme. So
that would depend on the material, I assume, too, right? Because of how it will travel on the material itself, right? And how it bends and the weight,
but not as much.
Not as much. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the equation. Actually, no. The density of the material is part of the equation. Yes, but then when what? I mean, basically, you're going to probably use steel string for larger projects. So one thing that I have done in the past is, especially with Day of Delight, I designed this larger kind of what I still call a tree harp, but it's like basically like a mostly plywood harp that is basically attached to a tree. The original idea was to attach it to a hollow tree and you try to use the resonance of that, but unfortunately in urban setting there are no hollow trees because they're too dangerous. So yeah, I mean, my like, I want to sort of really, what's the word, just kind of finesse the calculation to really say, when I'm designing an instrument, to, like, really know what the minimum lengths are to
optimize this. Interesting.
So that's where the larger, my interest in larger tree based instruments comes.
Interesting. So it's sort of like you want to really take to the limit what those kinds of strings can do. That's cool. And where did you learn let's say the math part of it? Was it your own interest? Was it from your education, or how did that go?
Education helps. I have a geology degree.
Okay.
And right. I mean, the equation for an earthquake traveling around the world is not too dissimilar to waves traveling through a steel string. But so as I said, I moved to Toronto, 10 years ago, and was an environmental consultant. And then during the recession, we were getting less work, and so I was kind of sitting at a desk with TurboCAD and any math program saying,
Mm-hmm.
use me to design a Kantele.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah? That's so cool. Oh, you see, like we've been like playing together for like a little while, and I didn't know you had the green John. That's so cool. Yeah. That's yeah. Like I'm fascinated about this relationship of like whenever there's like art and science, and I think music is the thing. So for that, but
yeah, especially when it comes to like the science and art of, you know, like when you look at a harp, like people don't really like use like a harp's a harp, right? But I mean, man, that the shape of the harp is physics, right? That's a graph.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's like preaching to the choir, brother. But I think that's one of those. It's a great way to finish the conversation part of this, and like this relationship of different cultures, art and science. I'm very happy that in the like beginning of night here in Toronto today, we are have this first episode with you. I'm very happy that we've done this. So now we're going to show us, we're going to take a little break, but then you're going to show us one of your compositions, right? Okay, so to finish off, we're going to play one of your compositions that is like inspired by all these things that we've been talking about. So can you tell us a little bit of about the song that you're going to play for us?
Yeah, so this song is sort of the ultimate fusion of everything that is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Dance and meditation and multidisciplinary art, really. So the song was originally written as a guided meditation, and then evolved into a mazurka, which is a dance form that's common to all of Europe, but my interest in it specifically comes from its prevalence in Western Finnish sort of recent tradition. And then, but interestingly enough, of course, it has slowed down because of my interest in more Western European mazurkas. Mm-hmm. So you'll hear the melody is kind of has elements of the Scandinavian or Finnic mazurkas, but is in the style of French mazurka. And then eventually it became part of a shadow puppet show because it has a lot of really good visuals, and then it became part of a jazz vespers because it is a cool tune, I think, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And then it became I played it recently for an actual Easter Sunday service at church recently. And so what I really like about this tune is that it really fits so many situations because it is about how we should be living and meditating and approaching life.
Cool. Yeah. So we're going to finish off the show with that. Again, Matti, thank you for being in the DNA of Music show. And I'm really glad that we got to chat, and I learned some stuff I didn't know about you, which is very cool. Okay, so with that, let's check out your song. Mm-hmm.
Tonight our souls be rest from the endless light to listen to the dream inside. So let the fire die tonight. Let the stars come shining through. They are the guide that will lead to you. They know which ancient tales are true. So let the stars come shining through. cedar touch the sky, it reaches out to the realm on high, not knowing if you wonder why. So let the cedar touch the sky. Let the river reach the sea, for it alone seeks its destiny. It flows along eternally, so let the river reach the sea. Charted in riddle song, we'll know the night before it's gone. So quench your lamp and walk along. Let the fire burn inside to show when all else is cast aside. The space in souls where sparks reside. So let the fire burn inside.